Recording in progress. Kiri, hello. I am so excited to have you here. Talk
Oh,
about confidence. So let's dive in. I would love for you, because you know yourself best, how introduce yourself and also let the listeners know what your superpower is, at least what you feel it is.
oh, amazing. Okay. So my name is Kiri, and I grew up being an athlete, hockey being my main sport that really took me to play hockey at York University. And I was also really fortunate that I could play on the New Zealand national ice hockey team. And through my experience through sport, I really got introduced to strength and conditioning and a mental performance coach. So that's what I do now. I do a little bit of strength and conditioning. However, really since COVID, I've transitioned full time into a mental performance consultant. So helping athletes with their mindset, confidence being a big thing that I work on with them. And just really empowering athletes. And my big thing is I really help athletes to have fun in their sport. Like I want to make sure that they're enjoying their sport, enjoying the journey, and they believe in themselves.
Mhm.
My superpower. Um, I would say my positivity. I know sometimes our people don't always love like why are you always so positive, but I would say, I really see the best in every situation. And I think also looking at people, seeing the best in everybody and
Mhm.
working on bringing that out. And so I might keep thinking about that one. I like that question. What is your superpower? So everybody else should think about that one. Um, that's the one that comes to me today, my
Oh,
positivity.
Oh, I love that. Well, I think that's such a powerful quality to have, especially as a coach, because we know if we take a strength-based approach with coaching and consulting, our clients are just going to get better results and they're going to win and love life even more,
Yes.
right? Um,
Yes.
and it's crazy to me that you and we went to York and we met each other after.
I know, I know. I'm like
Yeah.
so shocked we didn't know each other, but I guess maybe we just had 2 years actually overlapping. I was a little bit ahead of you.
Yeah.
But it's awesome. I feel like instantly we were on the same wavelength from when
Yep.
we first connected.
It's a,
Hmm.
it's a Yorkie thing. Well, I want to like I love your background because being in high level sport and then also being able to go through the strength and conditioning phase of a coach and now focusing, I know you still do S&C and now you're really focusing on the mental aspect of it. I'm curious to know, how has playing sports shaped your confidence?
Ooh, huge. So I grew up dyslexic, and so I actually think if I didn't have sport, I don't know if I would be nearly as confident. I do think I had some genetics that I was decent at it. Like both my parents are both quite athletic, but I look back to when I was younger, I had school where I was like D's, a solid D student, but I knew I loved gym, I excelled in sport. And so just having something where I was good at, and I was quite often when I was younger, I played boys hockey. I would play like I had no problem going head to head with boys, and I actually loved it. And I think that gave me a ton of confidence, like when I would, beat a boy. Um, but that would be maybe more my like later teens before the guys hit puberty as well. Then there was a little bit of a difference, but I think that gave me so much that I could focus on. I'm not getting as much wins or seeing that success in the classroom, but I knew I had a strength in something. And
Mhm.
so and that positively reinforced it, right? I was good at it. So I'd want to spend more time at that. And that really helped it in that side of things and growing my confidence when I was younger. And then now, when I get older, it's interesting. I still like to go back to sports that I'm good at. And even like I've had a ton of concussions. So I've taken a step away from hockey, but it's just interesting when I go back to hockey. That's something that I've spent so much time with. I just feel like I have such a joy to it, because when you see you're good at something, it often does bring that joy. To it's a little bit different now that I'm like, legs move and I'm not as fast and as fit as I was when I was in my prime, but it's still such a confidence boost to have those skills that you're developing,
Yeah.
and that side of things. So yeah, sport for me was a huge role in developing confidence for me. Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm sure
absolutely.
you're the same too, hey, with
With
sport.
competitive soccer for sure. And I played like almost every sport in the book. And I do think what I've gathered from what you said is like the sense of mastery of like being good at something. How do I get great at it and chipping
Mm-hmm.
away at it? And
Mm-hmm.
then like it's inevitable we compare ourselves to where other people are at. And it's
Yeah.
like, oh, I was able to beat a boy in this sport or
Mm-hmm.
this whatever it was. And
Mm-hmm.
that, can bring a sense of like, I can do this, right? And I
Yeah.
feel like even
Yeah.
with my upbringing, definitely playing sports, having a lot of friends that were boys in my neighborhood, and being able to, my father and my brother taught me so much about, I would say more on quote unquote the manlier tasks of using power tools, working on cars, and all that stuff. So I do think when it comes to childhood, there's so much that is formative at that point in our
Mm-hmm.
lives that can change
Mm-hmm.
our confidence for the rest of our life. Now, what about the
Yeah.
listener is like the woman listening to this and they're like, I don't like sports. I don't like doing things that, I don't know if this is the right way of framing it, of it's just like maybe there's like our stories aren't resonating with them.
Yeah.
How do we coach women to be more confident in themselves?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Um, the big thing that comes to mind, and I did want to mention this when I was younger too, for my, is how you frame it and see it as a challenge, right? Do you like challenge, or does that scare you? And you're going to run away and say, I'm not even going to try. So one of the biggest things with confidence is doing something hard, and then you have that proof of, oh wow, I did that, whatever that task was hard, and I did well, I did better than I expected. Or you know what, I learned something from it, and I did okay. I didn't die. I'm still here. I'm surviving, right? And just having that, taking action when you feel a little uncomfortable, is huge. And so seeing that as more how you frame it as a challenge, and embracing it as a challenge, and being okay that some things might be hard, but having also that like belief in yourself that like, do you know what, this is going to be hard, but I'll learn something from it, I'll get better from it, can be so huge.
Mm-hmm.
And that side of things, because a lot of times you don't even have that confidence to try, and then the longer you go where you're not taking those risks, then that gap becomes bigger before you even want to take any action.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes just taking the smallest step in terms of like, I am just going to, either put my running shoes on and go for a 5-minute walk, or I'm just going to do, 5 squats right here. And that's all I'm going to do. And that's a success. Right. And I think that can be the biggest thing, is how you frame um, those, big tasks that you might have.
Yeah, that is of such a powerful way of moving through resistance when trying something new, is managing our expectations, and that reframing that you
Yeah.
offered of actually saying like, okay, we're going to try this. I like the whole quote of like, you either win or learn, right?
Yeah.
There's really no failing or losing. It's,
Mhm.
I know that's something Kobe Bryant preaches a lot as well. So when it comes to being able to take that step, there's things that are going to come up. The fear of failure, the fear of embarrassment, the fear of judgment. How would you help someone move through that if they're having those feelings?
Fear. Yeah. Something, and I know for me, which was really big, is framing my goals and expectations, right? So, and especially, so comparison is a big thing, right? So we might compare to somebody else, and we're like, oh, look at this person's body. I want that. And then when we look towards, maybe we even put it out there in the world to be like, I'm going to lose this much weight. And the goals that we set, I think, need to be really realistic. And when we look at that, an example that comes to myself is journaling. I just kept saying, I want to journal more. I want to journal more. Well, every time I set that goal in terms of this is what I want to do, and I don't achieve it, that is like a knock against my confidence, because I had a belief, or sorry, I had like an intention, a goal, and I didn't follow through with it. And so I start to lose trust in what I'm even telling myself. So when we set those, we have these big goals that we have, and if it is, say, towards fitness, can we make them shorter term and more realistic? So coming back to my journaling, something that's been a game changer for me is I said, I'm going to journal 4 times a week. So it's super actionable, and I can start to track. I don't even need to, I can track it in my head to be like, okay, yeah, I've done 4 this week, or okay, I said 4. So getting on that, and that seems realistic to me, that right now, yes, I can do this. So that clarity of that goal, but then also being realistic. And once you start to achieve that for a few times, a few weeks, that starts to add that self-trust with. And then once you start to have that self-trust in terms of, I said I was going to do it and I did it, you start believing that you are a person that sticks to your word. So when you set a goal, you're like, well, I'm a person. If I set a goal, I work towards achieving it.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we look at fear side of things, looking at where it comes from, because a good chance the fear, and your examples that you came from as well, is when we look externally, right? What are other people going to think? What if I can't, that side of things. And there might be a little bit of like, what if I can't do it? But what if you can't do it? Are you worried if you can't do it, what other people are going to think as well? Like, is it actually that? Or is it going back to, do we need to reframe this? If you're scared to, what if I can't achieve it, in terms of, well, that's okay, because I know I'm going to learn so much, and this is going to get me closer to the person I want to be, right? In terms of, James Clear talks a lot about, in terms of habits, and talks a lot about the identity, right? In terms of becoming the type, having that identity in terms of being a runner. I want to, if it's run a 5K, work on becoming more of somebody who is a runner. And if you think of that being your identity, it can also be really helpful. Something else that I got from that book too, in terms of, say, in those moments, say, okay, what would a runner do? So then in those decision points, you're asking yourself, okay, what would the person of that identity that I want, what would they do? And that can help motivate you sometimes in those times when, if running is what you want, if you don't want to go for a run, to be like, no, this is what I want. What would a runner do? They would go for a run. So I find that's the big things. But also when you look at it, I think it's good to be realistic to actually identify what those fears are. right? Like, I think that's one of the first steps, is just really being realistic with yourself in terms of, do I feel like there's some resistance or fear that might be showing up?
Yeah. Oh my God, Kiri, there's so much to unpack there. And um, what I would love for like the listeners to really take away as you're talking about unpacking these fears and making the intentions more realistic is understanding that like let's normalize the fear from an evolutionary perspective. It's important for us to be part of a social tribe. Embarrassment, judgment, that would cause us to be ostracized from the pack, and we wouldn't survive. So there's a very real evolutionary instinctual experience we're having when we experience fear. So it's like, let's validate that and then unpack that a little bit more with what you said. And you said something so important is like, let's also reframe the expectations of, instead of setting the intention, the goal up here, what would make it feel a little bit less fearful, so that it's like, I got this, switching from the I can't mindset to the I can. I can't do it. And the beautiful thing about what you said is you tied in identity. And I really do feel that is something that a lot of people actually don't think about. They think about the process, right? Well, if we're talking about James, outcome goals, process goals, identity-based goals, right?
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit more about what you feel the impact is of focusing on those identity goals. Who am I becoming in the process, and how it impacts our confidence?
Yeah. I want to go back to on something else that you said.
Yeah, let's do
in
it.
terms of the, reframing the fear, right? And normalizing it. That goes back to what we were talking about earlier in terms of seeing, challenges as a positive, as that growth, right? And so I think, yeah, just reframing that fear is so huge. So I just wanted to double down on that.
Yeah.
And then you asked about identity and how the process, sorry, can you repeat that?
So the identity-based goals, like I was mentioning, I feel like a lot of people don't think of that. They think about what I need to do, not necessarily who I need to be. So when we actually put more focus on who we need to be, changing our identity, evolving it, for our best interest, how does that impact our confidence? Taking the identity first, identity goals approach first.
Yeah. I think it allows for, when we look at process, I also see a little bit more as you're probably tying that to more of an outcome goal, right? So again, if it is, let's just stick with running. So maybe you have a 5K that you want to run in a certain time. So, or you also have a race coming up. So you are super gung-ho on achieving this time at this race by this end date. So that could be awesome as you are leading up to that race. However, if you just have that one race that you're preparing for, once the race is done, you might just drastically decrease your running. Versus if you see that identity as I am a runner, then the race is done, but you still, maybe you decrease your volume a little bit, but you're still consistently adding in that type of activity that you see yourself as in terms of that identity. And then also going back to the end goal, if we're really tied up in that end goal, and that can again be the race or like something on a number on the scale and that side of things, if for the race and we have a time and we don't hit that time, it can take a really big shot at our confidence and really be very disappointed. And I see this a lot, maybe I see it a lot in my generations, being younger athletes, that they put so much pressure on themselves that this race they need to get this result, versus understanding that this is a process of, I am a runner, or I value my health and wellness. as that being your identity. So if that outcome isn't always super positive, you're still doing the same behaviors that is aligned with that identity.
You said something important. You said, I value my health and wellness. So I do feel like a lot of what James Clear talks about of identity-based goals is actually getting clear on your values. Because once we are clear on that, we can identify as an active person, a person that prioritizes their health, a runner, like whatever we label ourselves as. And I also like, I am wary of becoming so hung up on certain labels when it comes to how we identify ourselves, because we're so intersectional as human beings. So it's more of who you are and how do you want to show up on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. This is thinking when I did my master's, one of the quotes that my supervisor told me that like sticks with me so much and I continue to come back to is strong beliefs held lightly. So we can have a strong belief in terms of an identity. I'll just keep going back to this runner side of things. So it can be really good and lean into that to be positive in terms of this is my identity of being a runner. But say that person gets injured or whatever it is that gets taken away, it can drastically tear them apart because they put their identity only into that sole thing. And that can then, that's where it's like held lightly. So you have this, you lean into this being your belief in terms of your identity, but you also, you allow a little bit of leeway, like in terms of if things don't always go your way, that is okay to, you're okay to grow. You're okay to change. And that also goes back to what we were talking earlier in terms of how you see challenge, right? Are you okay to grow and evolve when a certain identity isn't serving you anymore? And it's a fine line. And, that's where transitions come from. And transitions can be really hard if you're seeing, because often some transitions you do willingly, other transitions you do, in my line of work, it's usually injury or like transitioning, finishing out of their sport. But a transition can be, from different careers. It can also be in terms of like, a loved one passing away. You need to transition in terms of, okay, how do I see myself in the world now without this individual in my life? And so that identity and role you used to have with them is slightly different because they're no longer there. And so being able to see it as growth, continue to come back to that, I find it so huge when you do have those challenges that come up.
Yeah, I love that you brought up the example of an athlete being injured. I also think of, I was reading an article probably a month ago of how Olympians sometimes experience, well, I shouldn't say sometimes, it's actually quite often depression, after
there's a term,
their
it's
competition.
Called, post-Olympic blues, like they call it that. Because they are single-minded for 4 years. That's all they've been focusing on. The Olympic happens and there's often only 3 medals. So some are disappointed. Even the people who do get a medal, they sometimes are depressed afterwards because their whole life changes. And often the ones who, they go from having no recognition, they get a gold medal and now they're like famous and recognizable. They're getting asked to do all these social events and like their life totally changes in terms of, I used to train pretty much every day and now I'm a spokesperson. And just that whole change of dynamics, that's an identity, right? So it's so common too of how you manage it. And I think a lot of it comes back to, if we go back to the Olympic side of things, going back to the Olympian knowing who they are and managing their time, right? They're getting requests for all these different things, and they feel like they're getting pulled in different directions, and they're spread too thin, and then they can't focus on themselves. They're doing things that they don't really love. Or they're just confused in terms of what their next steps are. Some want to continue, some want to retire. So yeah, it's a time of transition, which brings in a lot of, it can bring in a lot of growth, but often, and that's where like the term post-traumatic growth comes in, because it can also bring in a lot of like inner turmoil and challenges, but the ones who really take that time to reflect. And I think going back to confidence, the ones that, and one of the big things I'm understanding with confidence is, do you have the confidence in yourself that in the challenging times, you will be okay and you will be able to work your way through it, which is so huge.
A lot of what you're saying for like the general average person listening to this podcast, probably not an Olympian that's going to be listening to this I mean,
Yeah.
you are, like, reach out to me. I want to know who you are. For the general population that is listening to this, you highlighted something so important when it comes to transition, when we're working towards a goal and it's a high and then a low, and then it could be transition with losing a loved one, a change in your job, a change in relationship status, whatever that is for you. What I'm hearing as we talk about confidence, the word that's coming up for me is almost like groundedness. You said knowing who you are, and being connected to yourself. So can you share a little bit more about, and I really feel like maybe we should have started with this, of like, how do you define confidence?
Yeah. In terms of confidence being belief in yourself. Yeah. And belief in your abilities. And sometimes you can have confidence, as a state in terms of a person, but you can also have confidence in terms of a trait. So, for myself, sports and in terms of hockey, that side of things, working out, I feel quite confident in that. You get me in terms of in front of games like PS4 or Xbox or something like that, I am so confident, but because I haven't spent as much time with that, but it doesn't mean I maybe it's all about how you approach that too, right? And do you see it again as a more of a challenge and an opportunity to learn and grow versus being like, no, I'm not even going to play. I suck at that. And then when we look at confidence, I really break it into 4 main categories. So performance accomplishments is all about going back to, what are you good at? Have you done? So for myself, again, hockey, I've spent a lot of hours developing that skill. So I've put in the work, and I've also seen that I've had positive experiences and achievements with that. So that's going to build up that performance accomplishments category. And so there's 4 here: performance accomplishments, seeing proof, verbal support, and emotional states. And I did performance accomplishments, so I'll go through each of them here. So seeing proof is a lot about seeing other people achieve the goals that you want to. And that can be really motivating. Sometimes you got to make sure you're not comparing yourself. You're seeing it more as, as a motivation that, oh, wow, if this person can do it, I can do it. And then maybe actually even asking for support from them or advice from them if you have that opportunity to learn from them. The third one being verbal support is that community around you in terms of people who encourage you. But it's also your own verbal support. So how do you self-talk? And this one is really, really huge, because you could achieve a lot of really, really great things. But if you are mean to yourself, hard on yourself, self-critical, then you're never going to feel confident, because it's never enough. No matter how much work you put in. And in my domain of work, when I see burnout, they will often push so hard, work so hard, but are still so mean to themselves. And that's sometimes where a lot of that burnout comes, because their standard is just so high that they're always going to fall short no matter how much work they put in. And then so that's good to know, right? Like some people, maybe they need to take action more, if they're not really getting that performance accomplishment and not taking action. Other people, maybe they're taking action, but they need to learn to be kinder to themselves, right?
Okay. This is great.
And, yeah. And then the fourth one is emotional states. So this one is how you perceive challenges and stress. So do you see them is it as an opportunity to grow? When you're hit with challenges, do you avoid? Do you freak out that like, oh my goodness, I can't do this. I suck at this. Like, oh, and I can't, no way I can do it. Right. Versus do you see it as oh, this is challenging. Okay. I'm going to focus here. I'll just try my best today. And it's, you see the bigger picture that it's going to take time for you to evolve and get better at this skill. So I find I like those four categories to really understand in terms of, okay, well, where is what's maybe holding you back from really developing confidence in your life towards a certain skill or as a person as well.
I would absolutely love to unpack more the verbal support from a self perspective. So I feel like a lot of the women I work with can have that dialogue of, I can't do this, I'm not enough, she's doing so much better than me, the comparisonitis.
Yep.
When that dialogue is coming up in our minds, how do we move through that?
Well, the first step is just noticing. So many people are unaware of how mean they are to themselves, right? So really taking a step back and noticing how you're talking to yourself. And this is an activity I do sometimes is, after, so again, for me, it's sports. So it's like after practice, after a game, I get them to write down what they remember their thoughts were. And if it's a helpful thought, put a positive. If it's an unhelpful put a negative sign. If it's a neutral thought, just kind of like, sometimes I usually say those are more like description side of things, like, oh, your walls are white. It's not going to change or take away from your state that you're currently in. You just put an equal sign. So just building up that self-awareness. So that could be, some people are working with their relationship with food or their relationship with the gym. Maybe it's after those moments, writing down what those thoughts actually were when it's still fresh in your mind.
Yeah.
And you can bring that to the surface more. That's the starting point. If you don't even realize, then you can't even work through changing that relationship and conversation you have with yourself. Sometimes emotions can also help you, right? Our emotions and thoughts are so tied and linked. So if you're feeling uncomfortable, if you're feeling embarrassed, if you're feeling, like you're not trusting yourself, those can also be moments where you take a second to pause and say, okay, so what am I telling myself? And then,
And then, sorry, I'll let you finish that thought.
And then I was going to say, you can continue to work through what those thoughts are. Now, often we're focusing on something outside of our control or something that, isn't serving us right now. Something that I really love is bringing in more of that self-compassion and asking myself, what would my best friend tell me? And, so often what you're telling yourself, if you would not tell your best friend that in the exact same situation, you shouldn't be telling it to yourself. And just in those moments, talking to yourself like you would talk to your best friend is so huge and so helpful.
So self-awareness definitely at the forefront of, if that client says something, bringing bringing light to it, saying, hey, can you repeat what you just said? Like, are you noticing that you're saying this? And you and I, we've worked with Mike before, of like, even around story work. Okay, can we say a little bit slower? How does that feel in your body? Right?
So
Like,
huge.
what happens when you believe that thought or that feeling or that belief? Right? And I would love to pick your brain on this, because I'm trying to see how it fits in my practice. You mentioned, I love that exercise that you take your athletes with, of, okay, the thought, is it positive? Is it neutral? Is it negative, or helpful? And I'm so curious to know your perspective on this, because I'm honestly very hesitant to label things as negative and positive. I think every thought, feeling, belief, experience we have is there to teach us something. Because the one thing I think about is like, oh, I had a negative thought, and there could be some shame or some guilt or some frustration of like, why can't I just be positive? And it's like, that negative quote unquote, for those of you who are watching this video, there's an air quotes, that negative experience, thought, feeling is there to teach you something. So what do you feel is like an optimal way to have to label these sorts of things, so that also being very productive with coaching our clients?
Yeah, I have like two different directions here to go in, because I think it's such a great point. So I love to frame it more as helpful and unhelpful, because some people, again, in the sports side of things, might be like, come on, you're better than this, let's go. For some people, they might actually use that as a helpful thought, where other people, it might take away and not serve them. So when we look at the definition of helpful, unhelpful, helpful is it improves your state and how you're feeling and moves you closer towards your end goal. And unhelpful being the opposite. It takes away from your state and prevents you from getting closer to your end goal. So that's how I see those two. And so, yeah, it's really important that you understand how it fits for you.
Yeah.
And then in terms of that, like, growth side of things, I love what you say in terms of maybe that's what you need. And I kind of have this like 3 complaint rule in terms of how you perceive things, because sometimes you can have something that doesn't seem like a helpful thought, so it's a little bit unhelpful and it's a little bit more of a complaint, but it can be more of a statement. So I usually like to use the example of, it's cold outside, right? So you say it once, well, it could be seen as more of a statement, but how you perceive it, and if you keep saying, oh, it's cold outside, oh, it's cold outside, but you don't do anything and you just keep stating it's cold outside, then you're probably going to start to get more frustrated and more frustrated in that side of things. Versus, so that's why I like to have kind of like 3, right? Once it's just a state, but once it's you're saying something for the 3rd time, okay, let's look at it a little bit more. Let's unpack this a little bit more. Do you need to accept that this is the current weather situation? Is there something to accept? Or do you need to take action on it? Do you need to bundle up a little bit more, right? So when we look at our thoughts, we often do have thought patterns that we're having the exact same thought over and over again. Yeah. And once off might just be a statement, not as big of a deal. But again, once we start to get into a repetitive habit of a thought that is unhelpful, then those become opportunities to open up and say, let's investigate a little bit more. The problem is it takes time, and a lot of people don't actually want to look at it and open up and reflect on those complaints. But I do find it can be a good rule of thumb when you're looking at that, okay, let's learn from this.
Yeah, well, I even think of unpacking the helpful versus unhelpful, because let's say I hate my body. Like, to the average person, that's going to be like, oh, that's an unhelpful thought. What if we were to unpack that a little bit more and actually draw out what is helpful about telling ourselves that? What is it really about? right?
Yes.
So,
Yes.
I also believe, and I'm not too sure if I'm articulating this as eloquently as I would like, of, okay, if that's the thought that you're in, the experience you're having, how is it helping you? How is it not serving you? Right? And
Yes.
going back to, the simple questions of, what's happening in your life when you believe that to be true? What could be different if you thought something different about your body, right? So
Yes.
it's yeah.
Oh, sorry. I'm just like so excited about this because it's interesting. My husband and I have conversations actually about this often. He's like, it's good to be mean to yourself because it motivates you. And again, good old Brene Brown really helping me to like understand this more. But it's the difference between shame and guilt. So guilt is, and she explains it, can actually be more as a beneficial feeling because it motivates you to take action. Shame gets you more to, you're harder on yourself, and it's more looking inward. So if you look at it's, and it comes back to the words that you say.
Yeah.
So shame being whatever you say, you embody it more. I am stupid. Guilt being more, I made a stupid mistake. So when you can separate yourself a little bit more, and you see it more as guilt, and you see it as that, okay, I made a stupid mistake. It allows you to take ownership for it. And also, okay, can I see this as more as a growth opportunity versus I'm so stupid, nobody's gonna like me, I hate my body, you know, it becomes as part of your identity. Funny, going back to identity.
Yeah.
So I think it can, and that can be something too, really listening to your language. And can you separate that in terms of a decision and an action versus who you are as a person?
Well, even going back to, I think it was your fourth pillar, emotional states of, I think it's so easy to feel like just on this emotional roller coaster. And as soon as we bring ourselves down, ground ourselves, become centered, and we can look at things more objectively versus perhaps subjectively, we can actually make progress on the things and the stories we're telling ourselves, because we're looking at it from a lens that is factual versus maybe not true, right? About the things that we're telling ourselves. So I really do believe in the power of slowing down and unpacking it even more, even if you don't want to label certain things as positive, negative, helpful, or unhelpful. Let's just explore it without judgment and see what can come out of it.
And I love what you say there, that we can have a thought and then we judge ourselves for that thought, right? So with that, you have a thought, and without judgment, just get curious. Okay, interesting. Why do I think I'm stupid?
Where'd you come from,
really?
thought?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting thought there. And you can, again, you can step back and have more of those conversations with yourself instead of it just being truth all the time. And it's huge. And it can be really helpful. It's not always easy, but it can be really, really helpful in terms of how you see yourself, and then your confidence as well. Yeah,
for sure. Kiri, it's been a slice. You should come to Calgary and we can talk about confidence for a full day.
Oh, I love it.
What
Yes,
is
love
one
this
thing that
conversation.
you would like to share with the listeners if they could walk away with this one golden nugget key lesson when it comes to confidence? What would you want them to walk away with?
A common theme, the big thing is seeing it as a growth opportunity and being willing to take action and learn. And that it's it's so cheesy, the like win or learn, but it's so hard. And being willing to see those challenges as growth opportunities, I think is the biggest thing in that confidence side of things, and believing, yep, whatever challenges come up, I know I'll grow from this and I'll become a better person through this.
Yeah, you're really highlighting the importance of it being a skill to practice versus something you just have. And I think that's important for the listeners to walk away with. We aren't all born baby Beyoncés. Like Beyonce, like had to develop her confidence over years and years of mastering
Yeah.
her skills, but also like, obviously I don't know how her journey very deeply of like just really discovering who you are, and how you want to show up. So that was amazing. I'm glad you finished off in that at that note. If people are listening and they're like, I like this Kiri girl, I want to get to know her, I want to be in her world, how can people find you?
Yeah, awesome. I'm on Instagram at coach_Kiri. And then you can also check out my website, which is performu.ca. So those are definitely the best two places to check out what I'm doing. And in terms of the social media, love to post things that I feel will be helpful and beneficial for athletes, but also anybody to work on their mindset and that side of things. So
Yeah, amazing. Well, for those of you who are listening, shoot Kiri a message, myself a message, what your key takeaway was, any pivotal shifts that you've had, maybe in a way of thinking around confidence. We would absolutely love to hear from you. And thank you, Kiri, for your expertise, your energy.
Thank you.
And we look forward to having the listeners join the next episode. Bye for now.